There's something unsettling about watching someone who thinks too deeply. You can see it in their eyes during conversations. That distant look that suggests they're processing layers of meaning others can't even perceive. They hear what you're not saying, feel what you're trying to hide, and carry the weight of insights that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who mapped the hidden territories of the human mind, issued a warning about these individuals that still echoes through psychology today. He observed something troubling about those blessed with the gift of profound thought, something that challenges everything we believe about intelligence, awareness, and what it truly means to understand the world around us. Picture this scenario. You're sitting in a meeting at work, and everyone's nodding along to a presentation about quarterly goals and productivity metrics. The room buzzes with enthusiasm about targets and benchmarks, but there's one person who hasn't said a word. Their brow is furrowed, not with confusion, but with a kind of recognition that makes others uncomfortable. They're seeing through the corporate theater, understanding the deeper currents of fear and desperation that drive these endless cycles of optimization and growth. When they finally speak, their question cuts through the superficial chatter like a blade. They ask about the human cost, the sustainability, the meaning behind all this frantic activity. The room falls silent. Someone clears their throat. The conversation quickly shifts back to safer territory, but the damage is done. The deeper thinker has revealed what everyone was trying so hard to ignore. This is the phenomenon Jung warned us about. The curse that comes disguised as a gift. The psychological burden carried by those who cannot help but see clearly in a world that thrives on comfortable illusions. Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, diving into the murky waters of the unconscious mind where our deepest fears and desires hide. Through his work with patients, his analysis of dreams, and his exploration of mythology and symbolism, he discovered something profound about human consciousness. Most people, he realized, live their entire lives without ever truly waking up. They sleepwalk through existence, following scripts written by others, accepting reality as it's presented to them, never questioning the fundamental assumptions that shape their world. But some individuals are different. They possess what Jung called a heightened consciousness, an inability to accept surface explanations, a compulsive need to dig deeper into the nature of existence itself. These are the people who ask the questions others are afraid to ask, who feel the emotions others have learned to suppress, who see the patterns others choose to ignore. Jung's warning was simple yet chilling. The more conscious a person becomes, the more isolated they inevitably grow. Not because they choose solitude, but because consciousness creates a barrier between them and the unconscious masses. They begin to speak a different language, operate on a different frequency, live in a different reality altogether. Think about the last time you tried to have a meaningful conversation with someone about something that truly mattered to you. Perhaps you wanted to discuss the nature of happiness, the meaning of success, or the way society shapes our deepest beliefs about ourselves. How did that conversation go? Did you find the connection you were seeking, or did you encounter polite discomfort, quick topic changes, or blank stares that suggested you might as well have been speaking in a foreign language? This is the daily experience of the deeper thinker. They carry insights that feel urgent and important, but they struggle to find anyone who can receive them. It's like being the only person in a crowded room who can see that the building is on fire, while everyone else continues their casual conversations about the weather. Jung understood this isolation intimately because he lived it himself. His theories were considered radical, even dangerous, by many of his contemporaries. His exploration of the shadow self, the collective unconscious, and the process of individuation challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature and society. He was often misunderstood, criticized, and marginalized by the very academic community he was trying to serve. But Jung's warning goes deeper than simple social isolation. He observed that heightened consciousness comes with a psychological price that few people are prepared to pay. The deeper thinker doesn't just see more clearly, they feel more intensely. They experience what Jung called the amplification of affect, where emotions become magnified and overwhelming. Consider what happens when someone with this heightened awareness encounters injustice, suffering, or cruelty. While others might feel a brief pang of sympathy before moving on with their day, the deeper thinker absorbs the full emotional weight of what they've witnessed. They carry it with them, turn it over in their minds, feel its implications reverberating through their consciousness long after others have forgotten. This emotional intensity extends to positive experiences as well. The deeper thinker might find themselves overwhelmed by the beauty of a sunset, moved to tears by a piece of music, or filled with profound joy by a moment of genuine human connection. They live at the extremes of human experience, feeling everything more deeply than seems normal or healthy. Jung recognized that this intensity could be both a gift and a curse. On one hand, it allows for richer, more meaningful experiences. The deeper thinker has access to levels of beauty, truth, and understanding that remain hidden from others. They can find profound meaning in experiences that others dismiss as mundane. They can see connections and patterns that reveal the hidden order underlying apparent chaos. But this same intensity can become overwhelming. The deeper thinker may find themselves paralyzed by the weight of their own awareness, unable to function in a world that seems shallow and meaningless. They might struggle with what Jung called the problem of opposites, the ability to see multiple perspectives simultaneously, which can make decision-making agonizing and action difficult. Jung observed that many of his patients who possessed this heightened consciousness struggled with depression, anxiety, and a sense of alienation that went far beyond normal social awkwardness. They felt like strangers in their own culture, outsiders looking in at a world that seemed to be sleepwalking through existence. The deeper thinker often finds themselves caught between two impossible choices. They can either suppress their natural inclination toward depth and meaning, forcing themselves to engage with the world at a superficial level, or they can remain true to their nature and accept the isolation that comes with it. Neither option is particularly appealing. Suppressing their depth feels like a kind of spiritual suicide, a betrayal of their essential nature. But accepting isolation can lead to bitterness, cynicism, and a gradual withdrawal from human connection altogether. Jung saw this dilemma playing out in the lives of many creative individuals, philosophers, artists, and anyone whose work required them to explore the deeper dimensions of human experience. They often struggled with mental health issues, relationship problems, and a sense of being fundamentally misunderstood by the world around them. But Jung's warning wasn't meant to discourage deeper thinking or consciousness. Instead, he wanted to prepare people for the challenges that come with this gift, to help them understand that their struggles aren't personal failures, but natural consequences of their heightened awareness. He believed that deeper thinkers serve a crucial function in society, even when that society doesn't appreciate or understand them. They act as canaries in the coal mine, sensing dangers and opportunities that others miss. They push boundaries, challenge assumptions, and force uncomfortable conversations that ultimately lead to growth and progress. The question that haunts many deeper thinkers is whether their suffering serves any purpose. Are they simply cursed with an awareness that brings more pain than joy? Or is there something valuable in their unique perspective that justifies the psychological cost? Jung's answer was complex, but ultimately hopeful. He believed that consciousness, even painful consciousness, was humanity's highest achievement. The deeper thinker's struggle wasn't meaningless suffering, but a necessary part of human evolution. They were pioneers exploring uncharted territories of human experience, paving the way for others to follow. But this pioneering comes at a cost that Jung wanted people to understand before they embarked on the journey of deeper consciousness. The path inward, toward greater self-awareness and understanding, is not a path toward greater happiness or social acceptance. It's a path toward truth, with all the beauty and terror that truth contains. This creates what Jung called the fundamental paradox of consciousness, the very quality that makes life most meaningful. The ability to think deeply and see clearly is also the quality that can make life most difficult to bear. The deeper thinker is simultaneously blessed and cursed, gifted and burdened, enlightened and isolated. Understanding this paradox is crucial for anyone who finds themselves drawn toward deeper thinking and greater consciousness. It helps explain why the path of awareness often feels lonely and difficult, why meaningful conversations seem so rare, why the world often feels shallow and disappointing. But Jung's warning also contains a hidden promise. If you can understand and accept the costs that come with deeper thinking, if you can learn to navigate the isolation and intensity that consciousness brings, then you have access to experiences and insights that remain forever hidden from those who choose to remain asleep. The question each person must answer for themselves is whether that access is worth the price Jung warned us about. The deeper thinker's journey becomes even more complex when we examine what Jung called the shadow integration process. This isn't just about thinking profound thoughts or having philosophical insights. It's about confronting the parts of human nature that most people spend their entire lives running from. Imagine discovering that everything you believed about yourself, your family, your culture, and your world contains elements of deception and self-betrayal. The deeper thinker doesn't get to maintain comfortable illusions about human goodness or societal progress. They see the darkness that lurks beneath polite conversations, the violence that underlies civilized behavior, the fear that drives most human decisions. This confrontation with shadow material creates what Jung described as a psychological crisis that few people are equipped to handle. While others can dismiss uncomfortable truths as exceptions or aberrations, the deeper thinker recognizes them as fundamental aspects of the human condition. They can't unsee the cruelty in kindness, the selfishness in altruism, the desperation in confidence. Consider what happens when a deeper thinker observes a family gathering. Where others see love and connection, they might also perceive the undercurrents of resentment, competition, and manipulation that flow beneath the surface. They notice how family members use guilt as a weapon, how love becomes conditional on behavior, how generations pass down trauma disguised as tradition. This doesn't mean they become cynical or pessimistic. Instead, they develop what Jung called differentiated consciousness, the ability to hold contradictory truths simultaneously. They can see both the genuine love and the hidden resentment, both the noble intentions and the selfish motivations, both the beauty and the ugliness that coexist in every human interaction. But this differentiated consciousness comes with a terrible burden. The deeper thinker must navigate a world where most people operate from what Jung termed unconscious projections. They encounter individuals who haven't examined their own motivations, who blame others for their internal conflicts, who create elaborate stories to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves. The deeper thinker becomes a repository for these projections. Because they can see clearly, others unconsciously dump their unresolved psychological material onto them. They become the target for anger that belongs elsewhere, the recipient of expectations they never agreed to fulfill, the container for emotions that others refuse to own. This dynamic creates what Jung observed as the scapegoat phenomenon. The person who sees most clearly often becomes the one blamed for the problems they identify. When a deeper thinker points out dysfunction in a family system, they're labeled as negative or troublesome. When they identify problems in an organization, they're seen as disloyal or difficult. When they question societal assumptions, they're dismissed as pessimistic or unrealistic. The psychological weight of carrying both their own awareness and the projected material from others can become crushing. Jung noted that many of his most conscious patients struggled with what he called the burden of individuation. They had to separate their own psychological material from what others had placed on them, while simultaneously dealing with the isolation that comes from seeing clearly in an unconscious world. This burden becomes particularly acute in intimate relationships. The deeper thinker craves authentic connection but often finds that their level of awareness makes others uncomfortable. They see through the social masks that people wear, perceive the fears and insecurities that drive behavior, and understand the psychological dynamics that most people prefer to keep hidden. Their partners might initially be attracted to their depth and insight, but over time, being truly seen can become threatening. The deeper thinker's ability to perceive hidden motivations and unconscious patterns can make others feel exposed and vulnerable. What starts as fascinating becomes overwhelming. What seemed insightful begins to feel invasive. Jung observed that deeper thinkers often find themselves in relationships where they're simultaneously needed and resented. Others are drawn to their clarity and understanding, but they also feel threatened by someone who can see through their defenses. This creates a push-pull dynamic where the deeper thinker is alternately pursued and rejected, valued and feared. The workplace presents its own unique challenges for the conscious individual. Jung noted that most organizational structures are built on collective unconsciousness, requiring people to suppress their awareness in service of group harmony and productivity. The deeper thinker who questions these structures or points out their inherent contradictions often finds themselves marginalized or pushed out. They might observe how corporate value statements contradict actual practices, how leadership decisions are driven by fear rather than wisdom, how systems are designed to maintain power rather than serve their stated purposes. But voicing these observations typically leads to career difficulties rather than positive change. This creates what Jung called the adaptation dilemma. The deeper thinker must choose between authentic expression and social survival. They can either suppress their insights to fit in, or they can speak their truth and face the consequences. Neither option feels satisfactory, leading to a chronic sense of being trapped between impossible choices. The health implications of this psychological burden cannot be ignored. Jung observed that many conscious individuals struggle with what he termed existential exhaustion. The constant effort required to navigate an unconscious world while maintaining their own awareness takes a tremendous toll on their physical and emotional well-being. They might experience chronic fatigue that isn't relieved by rest, anxiety that seems to have no specific cause, or depression that feels more like grief for a world that could be but isn't. Their nervous systems become overloaded from processing not just their own experiences, but the unconscious material projected onto them by others. Sleep becomes elusive because their minds can't easily shut down the constant analysis and pattern recognition that defines their waking hours. They lie awake at night replaying conversations, analyzing interactions, trying to understand the complex web of human psychology they navigate daily. Jung recognized that this wasn't pathology, but rather a natural response to carrying a level of consciousness that their environment isn't equipped to support. The deeper thinker's symptoms often reflect the health of their awareness rather than sickness in their psyche. Yet within this struggle, Jung identified something he called the compensatory function of consciousness. The deeper thinker's suffering serves a purpose beyond their individual experience. They act as psychological pioneers, exploring territories of human awareness that others aren't ready to enter. Their insights, even when rejected, plant seeds that may not sprout until generations later. They serve as early warning systems for collective psychological problems, sensing dangers and opportunities that won't become obvious to others until much later. Their questions challenge assumptions that need to be examined. Their discomfort points to areas where growth is needed. Their isolation highlights the cost of unconscious living. But Jung's warning remains stark and uncompromising. The path of deeper consciousness is not a path toward personal happiness or social success. It's a path toward truth, with all the beauty and terror that truth contains. Those who embark on this journey must be prepared for the psychological costs that Jung so carefully documented in his decades of clinical work. The question that emerges from Jung's warning isn't whether deeper thinking is worth pursuing, but whether individuals are prepared for the reality of what that pursuit actually entails. Can they handle the isolation, the projection, the burden of seeing clearly in an unconscious world? Can they find meaning in their struggle, even when that struggle brings more pain than pleasure? Understanding these costs doesn't make them disappear, but it does provide a framework for navigating them with greater awareness and intention. The deeper thinker's relationship with time itself becomes distorted in ways that Jung found particularly fascinating and troubling. While others move through their days in a kind of automatic rhythm, the conscious individual experiences what he called temporal displacement. They live simultaneously in multiple time frames, carrying the weight of past insights, present observations, and future implications all at once. Watch a deeper thinker during a casual conversation about weekend plans. While others discuss movie choices or restaurant options, their mind is processing layers of meaning that extend far beyond the immediate moment. They're thinking about the psychological needs these activities fulfill, the cultural forces that shape these choices, the way these small decisions reflect larger patterns in human behavior. This temporal complexity creates a profound sense of disconnection from the present moment that others inhabit so easily. The deeper thinker struggles to engage with immediacy because they're constantly aware of context, history, and consequence. A simple question like, "How was your day?" becomes an existential puzzle requiring them to compress complex observations into digestible responses. Jung noticed that his most conscious patients often spoke about feeling like they were living in slow motion while the world rushed past them. They processed information so thoroughly that quick decisions became agonizing deliberations. They saw so many angles and implications that simple choices paralyzed them with possibility. This creates what Jung termed the decision paradox. The more clearly someone sees, the harder it becomes to act decisively. The deeper thinker recognizes that every choice eliminates other possibilities, that every action carries unintended consequences, that every decision reflects not just logical reasoning but unconscious motivations they may not fully understand. Consider the deeper thinker trying to choose a career path, where others might focus on salary, job security, or personal interest. They become overwhelmed by questions that most people never consider. What are the ethical implications of this work? How does this role contribute to or perpetuate systemic problems? What psychological needs am I trying to fulfill through this choice? How will this decision affect not just my future, but the futures of others? These aren't abstract philosophical questions for the deeper thinker. They're urgent psychological realities that demand consideration. But attempting to address them often leads to what Jung called analysis paralysis, where the pursuit of complete understanding prevents any action at all. The emotional landscape of the deeper thinker presents its own unique challenges that Jung spent considerable time exploring. They don't just feel emotions more intensely than others. They feel emotions that others don't even recognize exist. They experience what he called meta-emotions, feelings about feelings that create complex psychological layering. When a deeper thinker feels sadness, they simultaneously experience sadness about feeling sad, guilt about their emotional intensity, frustration with their inability to simply move on, and anxiety about how their emotional state affects others. This emotional recursion creates an exhausting psychological spiral that can make simple feelings overwhelmingly complex. They might find themselves crying not just because of loss, but because of their awareness of impermanence, their recognition of the fragility of all human connections, their understanding of how loss reveals the arbitrary nature of attachment itself. Their grief becomes multi-layered, encompassing not just personal pain, but existential recognition of the human condition. Jung observed that deeper thinkers often struggle with what he called emotional authenticity versus social functionality. They feel compelled to honor the full complexity of their emotional experience, but they also recognize that such authenticity often makes others uncomfortable. They must constantly negotiate between being true to their inner experience and being functional in social situations. This negotiation becomes particularly challenging during times of collective emotional experience. When society celebrates or mourns together, the deeper thinker often finds themselves out of sync with the collective mood. They might feel grief during celebrations, recognizing the underlying sadness that joy attempts to mask. They might feel hope during collective despair, seeing possibilities that others have given up on. Their emotional timing rarely matches the social rhythm, leaving them feeling isolated even during shared experiences. They become emotional outsiders, carrying feelings that don't fit the moment, asking questions that interrupt the collective narrative, bringing complexity to situations where others seek simplicity. The deeper thinker's relationship with language itself becomes a source of ongoing frustration. Jung noted that consciousness often outpaces the available vocabulary to express it. They have insights and experiences that simply don't translate well into conventional communication, leaving them struggling to bridge the gap between their inner understanding and external expression. They find themselves constantly searching for words that capture the nuance of their observations, only to settle for approximations that feel inadequate. They speak in metaphors and analogies, trying to convey experiences that resist direct description. They pause mid-sentence, struggling to find language that honors the complexity of what they're trying to communicate. This linguistic inadequacy creates another layer of isolation. Even when deeper thinkers find others who seem to understand them, the limitations of language often prevent true connection. They're left feeling like they're always explaining, always clarifying, always trying to bridge gaps that shouldn't exist, but persistently do. Jung recognized that this communication struggle wasn't a personal failing, but a natural consequence of exploring territories of human experience that most people haven't entered. The deeper thinker becomes a translator, attempting to render insights from the depths of consciousness into the surface language of everyday communication. The relationship between deeper thinking and creativity presents what Jung saw as both tremendous potential and dangerous pitfalls. The same consciousness that creates profound insights can become trapped in endless loops of analysis that prevent creative expression. The deeper thinker might have brilliant ideas but struggle to bring them into manifestation because they become overwhelmed by the complexity they perceive. They see so many ways a creative project could develop that they become paralyzed by possibility. They recognize so many potential flaws and limitations that they abandon projects before completion. They hold themselves to impossible standards of depth and meaning that make simple creative expression feel trivial and worthless. Yet when deeper thinkers do manage to channel their consciousness into creative work, the results often carry a power and authenticity that others find both compelling and unsettling. Their art, writing, or other creative expressions bypass conventional boundaries and speak directly to aspects of human experience that most people keep carefully hidden. Jung observed that the deeper thinker's creative process often resembles psychological excavation more than traditional artistic creation. They don't just express ideas, they unearth truths that have been buried beneath layers of social conditioning and personal defense mechanisms. But this excavation process can be psychologically destabilizing. The deeper thinker who commits to authentic creative expression often finds themselves confronting aspects of reality they'd rather avoid. Their own creative work becomes a mirror that reflects back truths about themselves and their world that can be difficult to bear. The social dynamics surrounding the deeper thinker create what Jung called the teacher-student paradox. Others are simultaneously drawn to their insights and threatened by their implications. People seek them out for wisdom and understanding, but then resist or reject the very insights they requested. The deeper thinker finds themselves in the impossible position of being asked to share their understanding while being expected to make that understanding comfortable and reassuring. They're supposed to provide depth without darkness, wisdom without difficulty, truth without consequences. This creates a chronic sense of being misunderstood and misused. The deeper thinker becomes a resource that others draw from without offering reciprocal understanding or support. They give their insights freely, but rarely receive the depth of engagement they crave in return. Jung noticed that many conscious individuals develop what he called helper fatigue, an exhaustion that comes from constantly giving psychological and emotional resources to others who aren't prepared to reciprocate at the same level. They become drained not just from their own inner work, but from the emotional labor of supporting others who don't understand the cost of consciousness. The physical manifestations of carrying such psychological weight become increasingly apparent as Jung studied deeper thinkers over time. They often develop what he termed consciousness symptoms, physical ailments that reflect the burden of their awareness, chronic headaches from constant mental activity, digestive issues from processing difficult truths, sleep disturbances from minds that won't quiet, autoimmune problems from systems overwhelmed by psychological stress. Their bodies rebel against the intensity of their mental and emotional lives, creating symptoms that force them to slow down and attend to physical needs they've been neglecting. But even their illnesses become complex psychological events, laden with meaning and symbolism that they can't help but analyze. Jung recognized that the deeper thinker's path toward healing required not just addressing symptoms, but understanding the fundamental tension between consciousness and embodied existence. They needed to learn how to be deeply aware while still being functional human beings, how to think profoundly while still taking care of basic needs. This integration challenge represents perhaps the most crucial aspect of Jung's warning about deeper thinking. It's not enough to develop consciousness. One must also learn how to carry it sustainably through a lifetime of human experience. As Jung delved deeper into his research, he discovered what he called the integration imperative. The deeper thinker cannot simply exist in a state of perpetual analysis and observation. At some point, they must find ways to transform their insights into lived wisdom, their understanding into embodied practice. This transformation process is where many deeper thinkers stumble and fall. They become so skilled at seeing, analyzing, and understanding that they forget how to simply be. They develop what Jung termed the observer's curse, where they become so detached from direct experience that they lose touch with the immediacy of life itself. The deeper thinker might spend hours contemplating the nature of love while struggling to experience genuine intimacy. They can articulate profound insights about human connection while feeling profoundly disconnected themselves. They understand the mechanics of joy while finding it increasingly difficult to feel genuine happiness. Jung observed that this disconnection wasn't a failure of understanding, but rather a natural consequence of over-identification with the thinking function. The conscious mind becomes so dominant that other aspects of human experience begin to atrophy. The deeper thinker becomes like a master musician who can analyze every note but has forgotten how to feel the music. This creates what Jung called the authenticity trap. The deeper thinker's commitment to seeing clearly can become its own form of prison. They become so focused on understanding truth that they lose touch with the subjective, irrational, and mysterious aspects of human existence that give life its color and meaning. The path toward integration requires what Jung described as a conscious descent into unconsciousness. The deeper thinker must learn to temporarily suspend their analytical faculties and allow themselves to experience life directly, without the mediating filter of constant interpretation and understanding. This doesn't mean abandoning their gift of insight, but rather learning to use it skillfully rather than compulsively. Like a surgeon who knows when to put down the scalpel, the deeper thinker must learn when to stop analyzing and start living. Jung found that many of his most successful patients were those who learned to embrace what he called conscious naivety. They could access their depth when it served them, but they could also allow themselves to experience wonder, spontaneity, and simple pleasure without immediately subjecting those experiences to psychological analysis. This balance requires tremendous self-awareness and discipline. The deeper thinker must learn to recognize when their consciousness is serving them and when it's imprisoning them. They must develop the wisdom to know when to think deeply and when to think not at all. The social world presents ongoing challenges for those attempting this integration. The deeper thinker must learn to navigate relationships without constantly analyzing the psychological dynamics at play. They must learn to enjoy conversations without always searching for hidden meanings. They must learn to participate in social rituals without constantly questioning their purpose and validity. This doesn't mean becoming unconscious again, something Jung believed was impossible once true awareness had been achieved. Instead, it means learning to hold consciousness lightly, to wear their insights like comfortable clothing rather than heavy armor. Jung's final warning about deeper thinking concerned what he called the meaning trap. The conscious individual's search for significance and purpose can become so intense that they reject any experience that doesn't carry profound meaning. They lose the ability to appreciate the simple, the mundane, the ordinary aspects of human existence. They might dismiss small talk as meaningless while failing to recognize the genuine human connection it can facilitate. They might reject entertainment as superficial while missing the legitimate need for rest and pleasure. They might criticize others for their unconsciousness while losing touch with their own humanity. The integration of consciousness requires embracing both the profound and the mundane, both the meaningful and the apparently meaningless. The deeper thinker must learn that not every moment needs to carry existential weight. Not every experience needs to be psychologically significant. Not every interaction needs to reveal deep truths about human nature. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of consciousness wasn't to transcend human existence, but to experience it more fully. The deeper thinker's journey should lead not away from life, but deeper into it. Not beyond humanity, but into the heart of what it means to be human. This requires what Jung called the courage of ordinariness. The deeper thinker must be willing to engage with life on its own terms, to find meaning in meaninglessness, to discover profundity in simplicity. They must learn that true wisdom includes knowing when not to be wise. The path forward for the deeper thinker isn't about eliminating their gift of consciousness, but about learning to carry it with grace and skill. They must develop what Jung called integrated awareness, the ability to access their depth while remaining functional in the everyday world. This integration doesn't happen automatically or easily. It requires conscious effort, ongoing practice, and often the support of others who understand the unique challenges that consciousness brings. The deeper thinker must learn to be both teacher and student, both observer and participant, both analyst and experiencer. Jung's warning about deeper thinking wasn't meant to discourage the pursuit of consciousness, but to prepare people for the reality of what that pursuit entails. Those who understand the costs can make informed choices about how to navigate them. Those who embrace the challenges can find ways to transform them into sources of strength and wisdom. The deeper thinker's journey is ultimately about learning to be fully human in all its complexity and contradiction. It's about finding ways to honor both the light and shadow of human experience, to embrace both understanding and mystery, to value both depth and surface. In the end, Jung believed that the world needs its deeper thinkers, not despite their struggles, but because of them. They serve as bridges between the conscious and unconscious, the known and unknown, the seen and unseen. Their very existence expands the possibilities of human experience and understanding. But they can only serve this function if they learn to survive and thrive in a world that doesn't always appreciate their gifts. They must find ways to maintain their consciousness without being destroyed by it, to share their insights without being depleted by the sharing, to remain true to their nature while still engaging meaningfully with others. Jung's final insight about deeper thinkers came from observing what he called the phenomenon of late-life clarity. Many of his patients who had struggled for decades with the burden of consciousness eventually reached a point where their awareness transformed from curse to calling. They stopped fighting their nature and began to see their psychological complexity as a form of sacred responsibility. This transformation wasn't automatic or guaranteed. It required what Jung described as a fundamental shift in perspective, from seeing consciousness as something that separated them from others to understanding it as something that connected them more deeply to the human experience. The deeper thinker who achieved this shift stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" They began to recognize that their sensitivity to psychological undercurrents wasn't a personal affliction, but a form of collective service. Like early warning systems in a mine, they detected dangerous gases before others even knew to look for them. Their discomfort with superficiality wasn't neurosis, but health responding to an unhealthy environment. Jung noticed that these transformed individuals developed what he called compassionate detachment. They could see clearly without being destroyed by what they saw. They could feel deeply without being overwhelmed by the intensity of their emotions. They learned to hold their insights lightly, offering them when appropriate, but not forcing them upon unwilling recipients. This maturation process often took decades to unfold. The younger, deeper thinker typically struggled with righteous anger about humanity's unconsciousness, frustrated by others' apparent blindness to obvious truths. But the mature, deeper thinker developed what Jung called wise patience, understanding that consciousness cannot be forced or rushed. They stopped trying to wake people up and instead focused on being available for those who were already stirring. They learned to recognize the signs of emerging awareness in others and to provide support during that vulnerable process. They became midwives of consciousness rather than missionaries of enlightenment. The financial and practical implications of being a deeper thinker also concerned Jung greatly. He observed that many conscious individuals struggled materially because their values didn't align with conventional measures of success. They had difficulty pursuing careers that felt meaningless, even when those careers offered security and status. This created what Jung called the survival paradox. The deeper thinker needed to find ways to support themselves financially while remaining true to their values and psychological needs. Some found creative solutions, building careers around their gifts of insight and understanding. Others learned to compartmentalize, earning money through conventional means while pursuing meaning through other channels. Jung emphasized that there was no single right answer to this dilemma. Each deeper thinker had to find their own way of balancing practical necessities with psychological authenticity. What mattered was making conscious choices rather than drifting into resentment about the limitations of an unconscious world. The legacy question haunted many of Jung's deeper thinking patients. They wondered whether their insights would survive them, whether their struggles served any purpose beyond their own experience. Jung believed that consciousness was cumulative, that each person who achieved greater awareness contributed to humanity's collective understanding. He saw deeper thinkers as evolutionary pioneers, exploring territories of human possibility that wouldn't become widely accessible for generations. Their individual journeys of consciousness contributed to what he called the expanding edge of human awareness, slowly pushing the boundaries of what was considered normal or possible. This perspective offered deeper thinkers a sense of purpose that transcended their personal struggles. They weren't just suffering for no reason, they were participating in humanity's gradual awakening. Their pain had meaning. Their isolation served a function. Their insights contributed to something larger than themselves. But Jung was careful not to romanticize this role. Being a consciousness pioneer was genuinely difficult and often thankless work. The deeper thinker shouldn't expect recognition or appreciation from their contemporaries. They had to find satisfaction in the work itself, in the knowledge that they were living authentically regardless of external validation. The question of whether to have children particularly troubled many deeper thinkers. They worried about passing on their psychological intensity to the next generation, about raising children in a world that might not understand or appreciate their sensitivity. They feared that their own struggles with consciousness might damage young minds that weren't equipped to handle such complexity. Jung's counsel was nuanced. He believed that conscious parents, despite their struggles, often raised more psychologically healthy children than unconscious parents who created damage without awareness. The deeper thinking parent's ability to see and acknowledge psychological dynamics could provide children with invaluable tools for navigating their own inner lives. However, he also warned about the dangers of psychological overwhelm. Deeper thinking parents needed to learn age-appropriate ways of sharing their insights, protecting their children from premature exposure to existential complexity, while still honoring their natural curiosity and emotional depth. As Jung's research progressed, he became increasingly convinced that the world was entering what he called a consciousness crisis. Traditional sources of meaning and guidance were breaking down, leaving people psychologically adrift without adequate replacement structures. In such times, deeper thinkers became even more crucial as guides and witnesses. He predicted that the coming decades would see increasing rates of anxiety, depression, and existential confusion as more people awakened to the limitations of conventional living without having developed the tools to navigate greater consciousness. The deeper thinkers who had already wrestled with these challenges would become valuable resources for those just beginning the journey. This prediction has proven remarkably accurate. Modern society grapples with epidemics of mental health issues that often reflect consciousness problems rather than brain chemistry disorders. People are waking up to the emptiness of consumer culture, the limitations of material success, the artificiality of social media connection, but they lack frameworks for understanding and navigating these realizations. Jung's warning about deeper thinking wasn't meant to discourage consciousness, but to prepare people for its realities. He wanted deeper thinkers to understand that their struggles were normal consequences of awareness, not personal failures or character defects. He wanted them to know that their path, while difficult, was also valuable and necessary. Most importantly, he wanted them to know they weren't alone. Scattered throughout history and across the globe were others who shared their burden and their gift. Finding these kindred spirits might take time and effort, but they existed. The deeper thinker's task was to remain open to connection while protecting themselves from those who couldn't handle their authenticity. Jung's legacy reminds us that consciousness is both humanity's greatest achievement and its most challenging burden. Those who carry this awareness serve a vital function, even when their service goes unrecognized. They are the canaries in the coal mine, the early warning system, the bridge between what is and what could be. If you recognize yourself in this description, if Jung's warning resonates with your own experience, know that your struggles have meaning. Your sensitivity is not weakness. Your questions are not problems. Your depth is not too much. You are exactly what this world needs, even when it doesn't know how to receive what you offer. The path of the deeper thinker is not easy, but it is necessary. And in walking it consciously, with full awareness of its costs and gifts, you honor both Jung's warning and his deepest hope for humanity's future.